This week on the Wheelhouse. Summer break is over. For kids and Congress, what that means for Connecticut. For Connecticut Public, I'm Frankie Graziano. This is the Wheelhouse, the show that connects politics to the people. We got your weekly dose of politics in Connecticut and beyond right here. And right here, summer break is ending for kids and for Congress. As students return to classrooms, lawmakers head back to Washington with just weeks to finalize federal funding before the September 30th fiscal year deadline. Without a deal, parts of the government could shut down. This hour, we explore how those high-stakes budget decisions and the scramble to avoid a shutdown ripple into Connecticut schools. We'll hear from educators on what they need and what they fear as the new school year begins. And later, not all students in Connecticut are returning from summer break. No, really. We'll hear from one district experimenting with a year-round school schedule. Joining me now, Kate Diaz. Kate is president of the Connecticut Education Association. Kate, so good to see you in person. It's been a while. Good to see you.
Thank you. We're really happy to be here. You know, back to school is always really fun for us as educators. A little stressful, not going to lie. A little stressful, a lot of transitioning, but it's probably the most optimistic time of year. It's where we walk in and, you know, everything is possible. So it's a really powerful time for us to kind of reconnect with our students, our families, our colleagues. And to settle into the really good work that goes on in our schools. We
love optimism. Optimism is a good thing. And for teachers, many of them have already been in school for quite some time trying to prepare. Also with us, Fran Rabinowitz, Executive Director of the Connecticut Association of Public School Superintendents. Fran, welcome to the Wheelhouse. Thank you for coming on today. And thank you for coming in.
Thank you, Frankie. I'm happy to be here. And as Kate said, I do love this time of year. We were just talking about the fact that we were seeing kids at bus stops and, you know, with their parents and all dressed up. And it's just it's a wonderful time of the year and stressful. I remember as superintendent how stressful this time was. You just wanted to make sure everything was perfect for the kids when they came back.
Are you stressed out? Are you feeling less optimistic? Are you feeling optimistic? Give us a call, 888-720-9677. We want to hear from all of you. 888-720-9677. I don't know, maybe one of you wants to share a back-to-school story. Whatever you got to do, give us a call, 888-720-9677. At the end of June, Kate, the Trump administration announced it would withhold $6.5 billion in federal K-12 funding for the 2025-26 school year. That's about how big Connecticut's budget is. Obviously, that's not the amount of money that we're losing, but that's pretty much ECS right there. For Connecticut, that's a loss of about $53.6 million for public school districts and community programs. What actions did school districts across the state take in response to hearing that initial news?
Well, we saw immediate contraction on things like before and after school programming. People started to automatically reduce staff, try and figure out, all right, how do we cut so that we don't start the school year in the hole, basically. And so you started to see an immediate kind of contraction in those particular programs. But then we also started to see sort of okay, maybe we need to slow our hiring. Well, wait a minute, where is the stability and instability occurring? So, you know, we saw an immediate response in, I think, those before and after school programs, truthfully. That was the first line that we saw impacted, because also those are the people that were in work in the summer programs. So they were the first to kind of alert us. We're hearing this, we're seeing this. My colleague just got a notice that their job would not be around. And so we started to see that first. Fortunately, Connecticut stepped up. You know, our attorney general filed suit immediately. We got a quick reaction that this was really likely to not stick, that we were going to start to see those funds released with some legal pressure, quite frankly. And so I think there was a holdback. Like, there was concern, but there was the cautious move forward. So, you know, I think fortunately, we didn't see the negative impact that we're going to see in the future days. I mean, we're talking about roughly 14% of Connecticut's education funding comes from the federal government. When we start talking about impact, that's anywhere between 4 and 7% in any local district if we talk about just a 50% cut. And that's what they're talking about, is how do we impact? And it's important for us to remember that literally 80% of those dollars go to students in really need-based circumstances. Things like special education is a little over 40% of those funds. About 40% of those funds are directly impacting students who come to us with some sort of challenge, right? It's like life challenge that is beyond their control. So 80% of the funding we're talking about are need-based, issues-based, that are students come to us with circumstances that they don't have any impact over and that we need to help address and serve them well. So when we talk about impact, we're really talking about the hardest hit kids are the ones who need us the most.
And that's where I want to go, Fran, the hardest hit districts as well. And I'm sure you're very familiar with one of them in particular.
I am.
In Bridgeport.
And I would say to you, when this came out, that $53.6 million, a district like Bridgeport was hit with $3.8 million. I think what is particularly egregious about it is we had already done our budgets, and we were dependent on that money, whether you were a tiny district or a big district. But Bridgeport would have lost teachers. Several teachers covered under Title II, many paraprofessionals under Title III. I went to Washington in the beginning of July to meet with our delegation just to advocate, and it was impounded. It was slowed down. We did get it eventually, but it really did curtail summer programs, and it caused undue stress to many of our educators who were told, I'm sure, your job may not be there next week. And then the money came back and, it was okay. But I foresee more of this going forward in the next round of funding, and I agree with Kate on IDEA and Title I. A district like Bridgeport receives $10 million at least in Title I funding. That is staff members, and so I remain very concerned. And Kate's right; it is our most vulnerable students that will be greatly hit. Not just the students with disabilities, yes, that's true, but also those students in poverty.
And that's the thing. I have a bias towards students with intellectual and developmental disabilities as being the father of one of them. So, but this is where we kind of talk about it and break it down. You're talking about losing paraprofessionals. You're losing funding for special education. So it's not that just every student that is having a disability is going to get out there and need some help in one sense. But what I'm trying to say is that if you are not able to meet these children where they are, they may end up, if they don't have the right system around them, they may end up not in the workforce, or they may end up in jail or something like that. So that's why it's very important to serve these children, especially at a young age.
Yeah.
Incredibly important. You're
talking about the paraprofessionals that are very the one-to-one care. It's been very important for my son as well. Yeah.
They're absolutely critical. And for our multilingual students, losing those paraprofessionals are their link to the language in many cases. And for students with disabilities, I absolutely worry about that. I mean, we're going to try to do our very best, but...
And you talked about poverty, too. I mean, you're talking about, this was very important, what you brought up earlier, before and after school care. Now you're talking to parents and you want them to uplift themselves out of poverty, and you say, do whatever you can to work. I got to work second shift or something like that. If I'm somebody that's working at 3, 4 o'clock to 12 o'clock at night, I don't know if I can get the coverage now if we're losing that before and after care, right, Kate?
Absolutely. And I think it's important for us to acknowledge that, we're trying to build workforce here in Connecticut. We've been talking for years about over 100,000 vacancies across the state of Connecticut in our workforce. We've been talking about the disconnected youth, all of these things, and really they're intertwined with the public school system. And so if we are not able to provide opportunities for our young people, they become disconnected. They become people who are not active in the workforce. We then continue to have gaps in our workforce development. We then suffer economically. When we talk about not having before and after school programs, what we learned in the pandemic was how central and critical education is for the workforce to be functional. That was one of the key takeaways, is that these things are all connected. You cannot impact one without impacting the other. And so it's not just that we want to serve children, which we do very definitely, but we want to serve our communities. And we can't do that without proper staffing. It's unsafe. It's unhealthy. It doesn't allow us to really kind of build the environments that are critical to our students' achievement and their ability to thrive. And so when we really kind of dig in to what is the impact of the loss of these kinds of funds, it is broad. I mean, in the immediate, yep, it's a closing of a program. But that also means that the person who is working second shift in a manufacturing company now can't make their shift. Now that manufacturer can't produce its product. Then we start to talk about delays in production. I mean, there is the long-term impact that gets felt by everyone across all sectors.
You were talking about we were talking about the money initially being withheld earlier, and the federal government tried to say afterwards that it would release the money. Was it no harm, no foul at that point, or was there devastating impacts?
I think
lingering impacts maybe is the word.
Yeah, and I think one of the real clear impact points is creating that level of instability creates workforce instability, which our teachers thrive on stability. Yeah. They love, these are people who work on a bell schedule, right? Yeah. So when you create instability, truly, and it just becomes a part of our culture and personality in some ways. And so when you create instability in these systems, you'd have systems like Bridgeport in Waterbury, where people go, I don't know if I have a job, so I'm going to find one elsewhere in a district that isn't suffering from this instability. So now you start to see the divide increase between the districts that are highly resourced and the ones that are struggling. Because if the resources are unstable, people will have to say, to Fran's point, somebody's getting told, I don't know where the funding for your job is coming from. That person then has to make a personal choice about their own work, life. Can I afford to wait and see if I have a job? And the answer is no. We have families, we have financial obligations, we have mortgages and car payments that need to be made as well. And most teachers do not have a wage high enough where they can wait it out. Most of our education system thrives on a workforce that's working month to month and meeting their bills and their economic demands on a real basic level. So we can't afford to hope we have a job. We can't wait that out. So if I'm being told maybe you have a job, I'm now looking for a job. So we're creating a high level of instability in places that can't afford that level of instability.
I would agree with you 100%. And, when we talk about students with disabilities, I think about reading. I mean, it's a passion for me, having kids learn to read. I believe kids should be reading by the end.
Fran, how many children in Connecticut can't read? What's the percentage?
Yes, a large percentage. And when
we're talking near 50%.
Yes, we're talking near 50% at the end of grade 3. And when
they're supposed to read by grade 1 too.
In my opinion, they should be reading by the end of grade 1. Yeah. And reading independently by the end of grade 3. Mm-hmm. And, you have single-digit percentages at proficiency in a place like Bridgeport. If you cut back on all of our resources, how do we teach those children to read? How do we have them reading independently? To me, that's the greatest strategy we have for our kids to move forward, and the return on investment is huge. So those are the things that really worry me. When you have 28 kids in a classroom in first grade and no aid because you have no resources or no reading teachers, that's an issue.
I can't continue to harp on this, Fran. Fran and Kate, you guys are gonna keep me all day on this. I can't keep harping on this part because I got to ask you another question, but. You talk about the haves and the have-nots. Single-digit proficiencies in Bridgeport. We're going to underscore that. We're also going to underscore the fact that, yes, kids in Darien, which is very nearby to Bridgeport, and some of the other suburbs there of Stamford, they could read at a better rate, but not necessarily, because we know that some of those kids are still using Guess the Word, or they're using private tutors or something like that. So the reading situation has been bungled a bit. There are disparities. I'm glad that Kate and Fran brought that up, because we want to hear from you. Are you seeing disparities out there? Are the haves separating themselves even further from the have-nots? Give us a call, 888-720-9677, 888-720-9677. I haven't said the number in a couple of weeks live. 888-720-9677. Looking at school budgets more broadly, though, Fran, many Connecticut towns are financially strained. Residents can be, let's say, reluctant nowadays to approve increases for education. How does that pressure show up in school budget discussions?
Oh, goodness. I have never seen so many referendums in my life, and failed referendums in a variety of districts. And, I worked personally with Bridgeport quite a bit this spring and summer. I see them heading into the year barely making their budget, and looking at a looming $26 million shortage by the end of the school year. So budgets are very tough. And I'll tell you something. I believe the budget is the roadmap for a school district. That's what you hold as important. Most of your budget is in staffing. If those budgets are cut back, staff is going to go. And staff is the most important piece of anyone's budget. Especially
if you've already put together the budget, and then the cuts come.
And you've got to cut it again. Superintendents and leadership teams are spending inordinate amounts of time just trying to get a budget passed. That takes away from other things that are very important as well.
I would argue that the single basic conversation that's ongoing perpetually and in school districts is money. Yeah. And it's unfortunate, because that is not what any of the people that are engaged in those conversations got in this work to do. It is foundational. It is necessary. It's important for sure. But it is an unfortunate distraction. And in a state like Connecticut, listen, we have a broad landscape of responsibility that we could talk about. We're 6th in the country for per pupil expenditures, but 44th in the country for state contribution. That is our opportunity gap in numbers, quite frankly. So, you end up in spaces where a Darien cut their mill rate, cut their budget at the local level, and is having that conversation when they've got a 14 mill rate. Like, that's their mill rate, is 14. And then you contrast that with Hamden, that can't increase their mill rate anymore. They are max capacity of what they can do to their community, and are struggling. And the state kind of is wedged in the middle of that as well, as in terms of, well, what is their contribution? And they haven't kept pace. So now you have municipal responsibility that is really quite burdensome. And then you layer in the federal instability. And so there are spaces that can manage that better than others, because they have more wealth in their communities. And so that gets played out real transparent. Like 100%.
So then you guys got to help me figure this out. How does the state fill in the blanks?
Well, I think the state has an obligation to invest in public education by looking at, for example, the foundation grant of the ECS formula has not kept pace with inflation. It is currently, and Fran, you can
flat
correct
funding?
Me. Well, so here's the deceptive model. The foundation itself has not kept pace with inflation. It's $2013. So we're pacing the base of the ECS formula. Other aspects of the formula have increased. So it's kind of this, we've seen increases in the dollars going to municipalities, but the base of that foundation, right, that base amount has not kept pace with inflation. So while dollar figures go up, the proportional contribution has
Yeah, the base is about 11,000 something. I mean, the cost of educating a child, the average cost in Connecticut is well over 20,000. So 11,000 is very, very far behind. We have been pushing for a change in the foundation for quite some time. And I just want to say one thing. I know money isn't everything. It's also about leadership and it's about good practice. But let me tell you, without money, you can't do it. And I just have to say that. I experienced it in Bridgeport with my teachers when I didn't have the resources to provide the system of intervention that was needed. And my teachers left because they said they wanted to be successful, and I didn't have the conditions to give them that success. It was horrible because I didn't have the resources. I knew what was needed for the classrooms, but I didn't have the resources to provide it. And that was before we're dealing with all of what are potential federal cuts.
I appreciate your perspective there, and I think that's a great place to land. I think that was a really excellent testimony. I appreciate having both of you on this morning. Fran Rabinowitz, Executive Director of the Connecticut Association of Public School Superintendents. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you, Frankie.
And Kate Diaz, the President of the Connecticut Education Association. Thanks for being here today.
Always a pleasure.
You all have a lot of work to do. God bless you and good luck here as you go forward.
Thank goodness we work very closely together.
Yes, that's right.
All true.
Yep.
I like that. They're in lockstep here in this program today. After the break, a field trip to Congress. We'll look at what's on the docket for lawmakers as they return from their August break. Hit us up, 888-720-9677. I remembered the number this time, 888-720-9677. This is the Wheelhouse from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Frankie Graziano. Congress is back from their August recess with a big deadline looming. The government budget must be finalized by the end of September. What's Connecticut's delegation hoping to see happen in the days ahead? Joining me now, a good friend of mine, Lisa Hagan. Lisa is a federal policy reporter for Connecticut Public and Connecticut Mirror. Lisa, thanks so much for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me. Always good to be here.
Good to see you from Capitol Hill this morning. We hope you'll join the conversation. If you're not on Capitol Hill or if you're in Connecticut, just give us a call, 888-720-9677. Put Lisa and I to the test. See if there's anything that you want to talk about. Congress returns to Washington in September. I know some of these lawmakers are starting to trickle back, Lisa. At the top of the agenda, and what is at the top of the agenda? What kinds of issues will lawmakers want to focus on in their first weeks back?
The big thing, it's funding the federal government, which is always an interesting and becoming an increasingly tougher fight for Congress over the past few years. And so that's the big thing. They're on recess for the last week. They return after Labor Day, so next Tuesday. And then they have less than a month to get it done, to get some type of federal funding done. And again, that's becoming increasingly hard at a time where a lot of federal funding is under threat or has been cut. There's disagreement over how to do that. And again, this is a fight we see all the time. It is never easy for Congress, but I think it'll be especially tough this time. So again, the big question is whether this is a short-term funding fix. Can Congress do a full year, funding bill? I don't know. We'll see at this point. It's looking at least like a short-term fix, at least for the foreseeable future, or at least until they figure out they're negotiating.
It sounds like things are pretty divided down there in Washington. Just in terms of when it comes to funding the government, how often do we actually see full year spending bills passed? Or should we expect something else? You talked about it. Is it more realistic to expect another short-term fix like the old CR, the continuing resolution?
I mean, at least from what I'm hearing from our delegation, the Connecticut delegation, it really seems like they're all expecting a continuing resolution, which, just to quickly explain that, it's just funding the federal government at existing levels for usually it's a very short period of time. It could be anywhere from days to weeks, and it just kind of holds them over until they do all their negotiating for a full year spending bill. Currently, Congress is operating on one since March, so it's been months. They're actually not even existing on current fiscal year levels. This is from fiscal year 2024. So Congress is a little bit behind on that. They will enter a new fiscal year 2026 on September 30th. And so they're hoping to get new spending levels done so that, just figure out what each agency needs and stuff like that. So again, I think the bigger question is not like when, not if, but when on a CR, but can it take them till the end of the year? Typically, Congress will pass full year spending bills. Usually it's all put together in an omnibus, usually by around Christmas time, end of December. I don't know at this rate. It might go longer. Congress may have to keep operating on these short-term fixes.
And when we talk about those short-term fixes and what it means for agencies and schools back home in Connecticut, are they concerned about the funding staying the same? Are they concerned about that limbo period where they're not sure if it's going to go up or down? What are some of the impacts for some of these agencies back home here in Connecticut?
Yeah, I mean, the nice thing about doing a short-term bill, a continuing resolution, is that everything just keeps going as is. It's not going to be a shutdown. That's the bigger pressing thing for folks and for states, right? That's definitely a tougher position to be put in. So just funding the government, at least keeping it flat funded, is better than nothing. That'll keep Connecticut going. I mean, schools are mostly operating on local budgets, but again, as long as Congress can pass government funding, the state and the country will be okay for the time being. I think the thing to watch, though, is once we get past this maybe short-term bill and Congress is negotiating longer-term full-year funding, how much are some of these agencies going to get? How much will the committees approve for, say, the Department of Education for things like Pell Grants and Title I funding, some of that funding that you guys were talking about earlier? And so that's up for negotiation at this point. That is something that both parties will have to weigh in. Obviously, there's different desires for how to fund things like the Department of Education, but I think that's really the thing to watch. But in the short term, Connecticut and all the agencies will be okay if they hold off on a shutdown.
The delegation has put forward requests for millions in earmarks. What are some of the biggest ticket items they're hoping to secure for the state?
Yeah, I look through these every year, and a lot of the times you see the same repeats. These are projects and nonprofits, things that lawmakers have seen in their districts for some time. But something that always catches my eye is I always notice that there's a lot of affordable housing development projects that are being funded. So that always seems to be ones that are really high on the list. That's not too surprising in a state like Connecticut, where we're constantly talking about a housing crisis and a housing shortage. Other things, infrastructure projects. Also, there's education in there. There's healthcare initiatives, things like community health centers. And so, I think what's also notable this time around is some of these projects and recipients, they have at times lost federal funding just throughout this year. And so some of them have been restored, like say for community health centers, but I'm sure a lot of them are looking to Congress for some of this earmarked funding to get some shored up funds.
But the disadvantage sort of there for state lawmakers, especially if they're going into a special session soon, I would imagine, is that they really can't necessarily rely on that or have any intel going into the special session. Or would you maybe have to wait to have the special session until after these budget negotiations start? Because we are talking about September for a special session in Connecticut. How are these federal negotiations impacting the special session? Do you have any idea?
Yeah, I mean, if the special session ends up being in September, I mean, that's going to coincide with a lot of these talks. State lawmakers and the governor, they're not going to know quite what, Congress is doing. And I think, they're looking, I think, more towards what was passed in the big, beautiful bill. And so they're working on some kind of runway. They know where cuts are going to happen. A lot of these things won't be implemented until a few years from now. So I think, Connecticut and states, at least when they're assessing that, they have some lead time before they have to think about things like cuts to SNAP, nutrition aid, or to Medicaid. So, I mean, I think they're going to take that all into consideration, but that will probably weigh most heavily on them as they're trying to figure that out. But yeah, this would also coincide with government funding. And again, I don't think at this point we really know where that's going to land or where agencies might see some further gaps.
So if those earmarks don't make it through, and certainly they probably won't while we're in a special session here, what options do Connecticut delegation members have? Do those priorities sort of get pushed to their next session or the next Congress?
It depends, because let's say they come back in September and they decide to punt government funding to December. Earmarks don't go away. They're going to still be talking about funding the federal government for, again, the upcoming fiscal year 2026. And so if that is still on the table, then earmarks could be greenlit. And then, let's say there's, that kind of that end of the year Christmas miracle that basically happens. And then a lot of these projects and recipients in Connecticut could see those earmarked dollars. What can happen, though, and this happened in this current fiscal year, is that if they just keep operating on these CRs, if they keep passing short-term funding and they don't include earmarks, they basically go away. And so that's why a lot of the ones that didn't get earmarks from the current fiscal year, they were requested, the delegation sought funds for them again for this upcoming year. And so that's why you're seeing a lot of repeats, because no one got that special earmarked funding this year.
Congress, as I said earlier, feels more divided than ever. And you see it in terms of the CRs. We're seeing more of the continuing resolutions in recent years than we had in past years. At least that's my understanding of the situation. But they're also divided in the work that they have to do and so what happens is you have so much to do and you're so divided, you don't necessarily have time to come up with these full year resolutions, and you have other business that you're trying to take care of. One person I talked to yesterday was Chris Murphy for an upcoming episode of the Wheelhouse. Actually, I talked to him 2 days ago. You can watch that full interview, folks, next Wednesday at 9 a.m., He says in it, he doesn't know how Democrats can vote for a budget that doesn't, quote, roll back Trump's corruption and lawlessness, unquote. So he thinks there's a lot of work that needs to be done first before there's a budget that's passed that should maybe have bipartisan support. How are lawmakers on both sides of the aisle viewing the government budget right now?
Yeah, and I think someone like Senator Chris Murphy is really interesting in this particular fight. Obviously, he's had his national profile really rising, but also he is on the Appropriations Committee on the Senate side. And then you also have one of the other members in the delegation, Rosa DeLauro, who has a really high profile role. She's, the top Democrat on the House Appropriations Committee. And so the delegation will all have a chance to vote on this, but I think Murphy and DeLauro have particularly interesting roles in this upcoming government funding fight. And so, they're going to have to figure out the best way to negotiate at a time when they don't have any power in Congress. I mean, Republicans control both majorities. And so they have the upper hand, but at the same time, to pass anything, especially through the Senate, you need buy-in from Democrats. And so that's where you have a little bit more of that leverage. And so I think we'll see if they take different tacks and strategies. The way that the Senate and the House are handling government funding right now in negotiations are very different. And so when you look at someone like Chris Murphy, the Senate is doing currently a bipartisan process of trying to pass government funding bills. And you heard him speak in that interview, and I've heard him as well, that he's mad about all the rollbacks to federal funding, including that rescission package that cut a bunch of public broadcasting funding and foreign aid funding. And so he's not taking votes on these things, even though they have support from almost all Democrats. He doesn't want to vote for something that has reversed a lot of federal funding. And so that's his strategy. Whether, Democrats all take that same strategy, that same tact, if that threatens a shutdown, we'll have to see. There's always that shutdown blame game. And so I think that factors a lot into these conversations.
Oh, that's an important reminder, especially for somebody who's been on vacation like I have for the last couple of weeks, even though you did have some new Wheelhouse content. That's an important reminder from Lisa Hagan that the federal Republican rescission package there did take money away from public broadcasting, including $2.1 million annually from Connecticut Public, where Lisa and I both work. So that is important to remind folks that as we're talking about in education earlier, when you lose money, it means that jobs could be lost. We haven't seen that yet here at Connecticut Public, but it's always murky here when you talk about these kind of things. So I'm glad you brought that point up because there is so much going on, but that's one situation in the Senate, and then you have the situation in the House. God be with our lawmakers there, Courtney, DeLauro, Larson, Of course, you have Himes and then Johanna Hayes, because they're even talking about whether or not they're going to bring up Epstein files and things like that. They've got a lot of business there in the House that they may be focused on other than the CR.
Yeah, that's definitely true. We'll see how that factors into all that. Again, the big thing for them is going to be is pushing that government funding bill. But you know what? Again, especially when you look at a place like the House, they have just such less leverage there because you can just pass things with a simple majority. And so but that's not to say that all Republicans are going to be on board with this. So again, we've seen at the same time when they've had to pass things, they're called suspension bills. You need 2/3 majority. That's when you need Democrats because there's such a small majority. So again, Democrats can still play their hand on this. I don't know if they'll push issues like bills around the Epstein files. That's probably going to come to bear at some point. I don't know how or maybe if they'll tie that to government funding. But
I'm just saying they got a lot of business they're trying to take care of in a short period of time. I think that was kind of your main point earlier, is that it's like it's September and they only have a short time when they get back in before the deadline. So there's just a lot of work to do. I want to say before we finish up here, the President Trump did come into office promising to dig the country out of a budget crisis. Is he making progress there? And what can you tell us about the numbers?
At least when we're looking at something like the Big Beautiful Bill that passed pretty recently, I mean, that's kind of what I'm looking at the most, because it will, at least the numbers show that it will increase the national debt. I've seen, figures around $3.4 trillion. And so that's mainly because there were all these different tax cuts and spending in there. And basically there just wasn't, while significant amounts of spending will be and are being cut, it wasn't enough to offset that. And so that's the thing you can look at the most in terms of where we are with a budget crisis or looking at the national debt. And so, I have seen Trump, and he's spoken about this a lot when he talks about his tariff policy, about having some of that kind of offset some of the national debt, being able to raise enough revenue through tariffs. I've seen him quote a $4 trillion number. Again, that might be over a significant period of time. And, frankly, we also need to see, will tariffs hold up? He's moved on a lot of those things. They're in place currently. I don't know if that will change. And so I think it's a little bit hard to tell at this point how much tariffs can kind of eat into, a ballooning national debt.
The larger point is that they're going to need to raise money, and this is what you're saying, because of the fact that you have this spending package. And, of course, this is an administration that in the first 100 days has spent more than any other administration. And the big concern that Murphy had when I talked to him the other day was the spending that they've done, particularly on immigration enforcement and perhaps putting more federal law enforcement on the streets. So that's going to be something to look forward to. You can hear that conversation again with Christopher Murphy, Senator, next Wednesday on the Wheelhouse. And you can follow more of Lisa Hagen's reporting at ctpublic.org and ctmirror.org. Lisa, so good to see you. Thank you for coming back on the show.
Thanks, Frankie. Enjoy the rest of your summer.
Oh, you as well. After the break, we hear from one superintendent of schools here in Connecticut whose district is trying out a year-round school calendar. Let's hear more about that. Join the conversation. Ask your questions for Dr. Cynthia Ritchie, 888-720-9677, 888-720-9677. Back with more after this. This is the Wheelhouse from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Frankie Graziano. Summer break may be over for Congress and most public school students in Connecticut, but for some students, school is still in session and has been. Joining me is Dr. Cynthia Ritchie, Superintendent of Schools for New London Public Schools. Dr. Ritchie, thank you so much for being here.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me.
So happy to have you on the show this morning. And folks, if you want to give us a call and talk to us really quickly, make sure you get on now. We only got about 10 minutes left. 888-720-9677 is the number. 888-720-9677. Dr. Ritchie, can you walk us through how the school year works in New London?
Sure, absolutely. So we basically restructured the calendar of the school days to be laid out differently around the academic school year. So we have divided the academic sessions to be 6 weeks of schooling and then 2-week breaks pretty much around the calendar year. So this does not mean adding more school days per se to the academic calendar for students, but we just laid them out differently. And our aims were to leverage time, space, resources, facilities, ultimately in hopes to close achievement gaps for students.
You have any intel on what those students are doing during the 2-week breaks?
Yes. So we started the program thinking that it would just be a break. So we had community conversations with teachers, with students, with families, with community. And we started this program coming back post-COVID. And there was a lot of kind of fear, angst, worry about what was coming into the schools and how we were going to help catch students up. So during the model of the planning, we were thinking about all of those different lenses of how we can help and benefit everyone. During the breaks, some take break. They actually have vacation. During the breaks, some come to school for childcare. During the breaks, some also receive virtual tutoring or home visits to their homes where teachers are having an opportunity to have and build a better relationship with families. During the breaks, we're also leveraging our local businesses to try to start to advertise what they could offer for families to take children out to learn more. Really saying that learning can happen everywhere in any time and space. And it doesn't have to be from 8 to 3, just 10 months a year during the school year.
I'm glad that you talked about post-COVID as a time frame for this. You started this around that. So it's been going on for a few years now. How are families and educators liking this format? What are they telling you?
Yeah, so we started really small with a cohort. We had one classroom that opened post-COVID, and we had a kindergarten/grade 1 classroom. And again, they are multi-age, multi-year, session-based schooling models. So through that model, the cohort of students stays with the teacher, and we had a teacher team at that time for 2 years. So that was a benefit because a lot of times, like not all students learn in 10 months, with so many minutes per content area at the same pace. And we were figuring out that there's a lot of wasted time with transitions. So for many of our students, they do need to catch up. They're a few grade levels behind academically or socially or emotionally. And we realized there wasn't enough time in the regular day. And if you think about this, when you start school, you have a teacher. Most of September is learning, building relationships, learning routines, everyone getting to know each other. And then you kind of go through the year. School ends. Most of our students come back in the summer for summer school. It's a different teacher. Same thing, new beginning. That ends. Then you come back in the fall. Different teacher, looking through files, getting to know everyone, same thing. And we thought, we could really reuse that time benefiting the knowledge that we have to plan instruction for our students and work with our families to close gaps. So that alone, just reducing transitions helps. And if it put it in perspective this way, if you had to change your doctor every single year, how efficient would that be? Here, our teachers really know our students, and those that are choosing to do home visits or extra tutoring or meeting up with them during the breaks, it's just an added bonus to help students continue to progress.
Oh my God, that's my biggest learning curve as a parent has become transitions. For children with special needs, we know that transitions are very important to work on, but also even neurotypical children, when you have to change a teacher or something like that, that's always gotten my daughter. That's always been her bugaboo every year. And now some of those kids aren't having to worry about that, you're saying.
Yes. So we started the K-1 back in 2022. And since then, we have slowly, without really advertising, been expanding. So now all of our elementary schools have the model program. It is a program that fits within the school of a traditional model as well. So when students come with their families to register, they have 2 tracks to pick. They can pick the 10-month traditional model or the year-round schooling model. And both are equally wonderful. It just depends on family need and student need. And the 2 tracks work within the same school setting. We had to leverage our, again, time, space, and resources to benefit students. And when we looked at the benefits that we had, our principals are 12 months, so they're already there. We had secretarial staff that was 12 months, so they were already there. everyone rides the same bus. Everyone still has the same, lunch waves and recess waves and participates in after school programming. So everything was fitting. And then when we took a look at our summer programming, which we have to have anyways, we have ESY for special education students, and then we have general education summer school programs. We just combined this year-round model to match those weeks. Again, leveraging the same resources that are already in the building, and the buildings were open anyways. So that has been a benefit for all. Now we have the program all the way up through middle school. So as the 3 years have gone by, we've quadrupled it, and we're really proud.
Just really quickly, besides the transition element, what other kind of things were you trying to solve for when you were doing this?
So we were trying to solve for academic gaps. So we had 2 teachers in the classroom to start. So we did a lot of small group instruction. And then again, making it multi-age, that means that, if a child is in grade 3, but on let's say grade 2 level or grade 4 level, the teacher can differentiate up and down the curriculum, pulling out priority standards for mastery to make sure the child meets those goals. And the teacher has 2 years to do that. So the teacher has 12 sessions, which is 2 years to really know the grade level standards for both. So besides transitions, we had some adjustment for the curriculum to be teaching units of instruction that were 6 weeks long. We also built in a strong parent component piece. So parents are invited in at the end of each 6-week session to the classroom where they actually see the teachers teaching and the kids then model their learning. And that has been a huge benefit as well, because teachers and schools can't do the work alone, and learning doesn't end at 3 o'clock when school gets out. But through this model, parents actually see what's happening in the classroom, see the resources, and then they're able to get a preview of what they're going to be learning about when school reopens. So it's a different start and end of curricular units, and then you have a little bit of an insight of what's to come. And then in between, you have a little bit of opportunity for if you need more, or if your student needs more, it's a cost-effective way to offer to teachers. Would you like to do a virtual tutoring? Would you like to do a home visit? And then the childcare is
I'm going to be a little more dynamic in the next couple of minutes here, just to kind of get some more stuff in and out of you, so that we can, because we only got a couple of minutes left. So just looking at the big picture, would you recommend this model to other districts? Do you feel like it's been a success overall?
I do recommend this model to other districts. Although we've only had 140 families so far, our outcomes have been fantastic. And we measure our outcomes from the 2-year cohort. So the first year that we did it with the team teaching model, 100% of our students met mastery in both math and literacy. So we were extremely thrilled. That model has continued, and now we're all the way up to, we have a preschool program, K1, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, 6 right now. Even if districts don't want to change to this calendar year, I think there are benefits to sharing. So for example, the partners that we leverage on the breaks, let's say we're doing a theme with art, music, dance, having guest speakers come, having students come for field trips. We could share that with others around us, and they can also benefit by coming and joining in or leveraging the resource. Teachers surprised us with a new idea. They are substituting sometimes on their break days for extra money. I never thought about that. And parents surprised us with this model, and they are gathering during break time, almost like a mini cohort of homeschool families.
Important ideas here that you're giving us in terms of buy-in from businesses, students, teachers, and parents. It's very good to hear about this. You've been listening to Dr. Cynthia Ritchie, Superintendent of Schools for New London Public Schools. Dr. Ritchie, appreciate you coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Today's show was produced by Chloe Wynn. It was edited by Robin Doyen-Aiken. Our technical producer is Dylan Reyes. Special thanks to Tess Terrible, Megan Fitzgerald, and the rest of our team here at Connecticut Public. I'm Frankie Graziano. This is The Wheelhouse. Thank you for listening.